way of showing the capital-labor relation and actually what's taken back by workers when they control the means of production, when they control their own capacities to work, when they're in control of the working day, when they control the surpluses that they produce, rather than the surplus going to the capitalists, the surplus stays with the workers. So it's, for me, it's a very, very radical cooperatives, worker cooperatives. Out of all cooperatives, worker cooperatives are the most radical and political spaces of work. And when workers take over formally the former spaces of work that employed them and then control them, it's again, I think it's even more explicit, this what's recuperated in this kind of what's taken over when this capital labor relation is contested. All right. And so that's kind of the, I hope I answered the question. Did I answer the question?
Yes, Mike already put in the chat that he is super satisfied with your answer. So thank you for that. And I have a question.
I just gotta say, I actually write about this quite a bit in chapter 4 of my book, and also in 2019 paper that I published in the Journal of Cultural Economy on it's called it's on the Empresa Recuperada. So if you see it there, I can send you the paper, and there I explicitly get into living labor and what's taken back and all that. So yeah.
Can I be next with the question, or I'm using my dominant position as a chair of the panel? Okay, so sure. I will ask you my question. How do you, when you were observing and making research in this ETRs, that is the
ERTs,
yeah. Sorry. How do they ensure the capabilities which are so needed in place when you are taking over the business? So I totally believe that they are experts on what they are doing, but to run the business, you have to learn constantly. So
yes,
what was the conditions in place to make them in the learning mood constantly?
Yes, this is one of the major challenges that they face. They have to learn how to workers have to suddenly learn how to be accountants, how to be marketers, how to manage the business. This is a huge challenge. The first recuperated enterprises, this was 25 years ago, this was very acute. And so they did it through the solidarity of professionals that they were working with already, with others in other social movements that had these skills, but it was a very challenging. 25 years into the movement, they have their own experts within the ERT movement. So the ERT movement is a movement of movement, so to speak. The ERTs have formed kind of what I call community union associations. So there's the National Movement of Recovered Enterprises, the National Confederation of Worker Cooperatives. So these associations, they're not unions per se, but they're kind of pseudo unions, but they're associations of or federations of recuperated enterprises. They have experts within the federations that assist in teaching workers how to be administrators, how to be, how to think about production in a strategic way and that. So it is quite challenging, but within the movement, there are experts that share their knowledge, and this is how it happens. It's collective knowledge sharing. And then some workers become, one of my case studies was a recovered clinic in the city of Córdoba. And one of the male nurses became the accountant of the firm. And he went to school, the cooperative paid for him to learn accounting, and he became the financial person of the cooperative. And that's how it happens. They learn over time, and they learn in these ad hoc type of ways. Some of them go back to school, but most of them learn by experience and from the support of others. And sometimes the unions, because what's interesting is that these workplaces don't stop being, so the workers continue with their union affiliation. This is because in Argentina, social benefits related to work related benefits are linked to union. And if you're not a unionized workplace, your association and that. So sometimes the unions, they send their own experts in to help as well. And then universities, there's several universities that help in teaching and help in training and assisting in the learning process of the workers. So, for example, the Programa Facultad Abierta, who I work with out of the University of Buenos Aires, that's led by Andres Ruggeri. They have a consultancy that helps in kind of reestablishing the business side of things as well. But this is where the cooperative movement. This is where the cooperative movement and unions and especially the cooperative movement and the cooperative sector can come in to help. Cooperative federations. This is how it works in Italy, for example.
I think that Dieter has his questions to you, so please stay with us. Dieter, your floor.
Okay, no problem. I will stay.
Okay, Marcelo, this is all wonderful and exciting what you tell us, but a problem that I raised this morning in my talk referring to Franz Oppenheimer was that single companies that are run cooperatively have a tendency in changing markets. And of course, they are the units that still stay in markets and are influenced by, well, market developments, that they tend or must transform into something that looks like a capitalist enterprise in the end. He calls this the law of transformation. And I think all this wonderful experience, and I could add some from Germany, from my own perspective and so on, all this experience does not solve the problem of how to regulate an economy, a whole economy, and not only a company, because the company is the perspective of these cooperatively taken over enterprises. Maybe you have some insights on that.
Yes. Well, the fundamental problem is with the capitalist markets. And undoubtedly, although in Argentina, like in Brazil, like in Uruguay, in particular, these new cooperatives, these worker recuperated enterprise cooperatives, in many ways practice non-capitalist forms of exchange in like production inputs and collaboration around many kind of business issues. They still produce for the marketplace, and sometimes but they don't completely produce for the market. So they produce for other collectives, other social movements. They're involved in supporting other non-capitalist entities. But to sustain themselves, whatever product or services they offer, they have to offer it into the market because state supports are limited. And so undoubtedly, they're still constrained by having to produce for competitive markets. And then there's the whole notion of cooperatives and cooperative workers so there's a theory of self-exploitation because you're producing for the market and you're exploiting your own labor. I have issues with that concept. I don't know if we can call it that exactly, but it doesn't go to a owner of the business, right? The surpluses. It stays with the cooperative members, and so therefore it's not exactly a form of exploitation as we know it in traditional capitalist firms. But without a doubt, this is an issue, and it doesn't necessarily eradicate the market. It doesn't. So capitalism has learned how to work with cooperatives, right? And in many ways, cooperatives are our way of our way for capitalism to kind of, it's a more benign form of capitalism. One can view it as that. But in many ways, these recuperated enterprises produce for non-capitalist markets and forms of exchange as well. One thing that they're innovating is how to, for example, they lobby the state, the Argentine state, to buy products from them. So social procurement initiatives, and some have managed to do that. So they produce, for example, graphic firms produce pamphlets and books for the national, state, or the provincial government in that. During COVID, many of Argentina's ERTs started producing masks and started offering other products that were beneficial or that were needed during the pandemic, for example. So they transformed their production to meet social needs, so to speak. So here's it sits in this state where it promises a law capitalism, but then within competing against competitive private sector firms, right? So this is where we're at, and this is where we have to start thinking about other ways of transforming the economy. When we talk about taking back the economy, transforming the economy from a capitalist economy to something else, we have to look at markets and other forms of provisioning the goods and services we need that aren't about profit, but are about social purpose, and so have other kind of measurements in place, right, to gauge what it means to produce, how much to produce in that, right? So does that answer your question? I think we're faced with this all, and sorry, go ahead.
I think it would be a long discussion, but since this is one of the main topics of this conference, I think we leave it here and listen to the wisdom of the other speakers.
For sure, absolutely. And it has a lot. This is why I'm glad that the conference is about cooperatives and the commons, because it's very much about reclaiming the commons. So spaces that are about economic exchange, but a different type of economic exchange, okay, and distribution and production. Yeah, thank you. Great question.
Okay, maybe one question from me, Marcelo. I will be very briefly. How can we imagine these forms of moral economy and the workers' resistance in the world of capitalism 2.0, or digital capitalism, or cognitive capitalism, or biopolitical capitalism, when the main resource which is exploited is our self, or our bios. Yeah, like Marcelo Vieta said, for example. Can we transfer this pattern of autogestion to the world of digital sphere of work?
Yes, oh, for sure. Well, platform cooperatives, the digital labor is particularly, I think, well suited to cooperativization. There was a movement, and this is the work that Trevor Schultz and Nathan Schneider and them have done around platform cooperativism. So, for example, why does social media is a particularly problematic space, right? Where it's not now. Capitalism isn't seizing our labor, but it's also seizing our thoughts and commodifying our thoughts. What Facebook is in the game of producing a space, using our knowledge and using algorithms to seize our thoughts and our social relations, which is perhaps even more nefarious when it's for the sake of making a profit. There's no reason why there couldn't be a cooperative Facebook, or in fact there are examples or emerging kind of ideas around this. Around, for example, why not? There was a movement a few years back to take over a shareholder revolt of Twitter. So there was a movement for get enough 50+1 shareholders in Twitter to actually declare it a cooperative and in essence take it over and recuperate the Twitter for users, right? So I think that it could happen. It's plausible, although there are many factors in place to prevent that. I'm sure. I'm not sure. I'm certain. I'm not only it's only speculative. It's going to take a lot of effort to overthrow capitalism. I think fundamentally the problem is with a capitalistic economic system. And so we're meeting shareholders' needs, and capitalism is quite 200 years old. In the past, there were other economic systems, and currently parallels to capitalism. In this conference, the commons was the space where people exchanged an economic activity for millennia, and there's still places where the commons thrive. I'm thinking of the way that forestry, for example, is managed in the Alps in Europe. It's mostly a commons system, right? With cooperatives and with community ownership and community control. I mean, the rural sector in Europe, much of it is organized, a lot of it is organized this way. Africa, right? Latin America, indigenous ways of knowing and exchange. So the problem is to think that capitalism is the economy, and it's not the economy, it's an economy, it's a form of economy. Unfortunately, it's a form of economy that has armies and armaments protecting it, right? Ultimately, through state coercion, it's maintained, right? But it's a predominant system. But we need to make parallel systems and make systems that are despite of capitalism. And I think that through taking over spaces of production and exchange, we can do this. We can do this in small scale, that then builds up by federating and by small experiences collaborating, much like many of your presenters have been talking about, I think. So I don't know if I answered that question. This is a big topic that you propose, and it's worthy of much more thinking and study. But I think the work of the platform cooperativism movement is well on its way, and I think it's proposing excellent suggestions for how to do it. Not only suggestions, but actually putting it in practice.
Mm-hmm. But this main thing is how to transform this old material forms of resistance to the new immaterial and cognitive forms. And maybe it is a mistake because, like Marx said, only a kind of revolution could reshift us to the other form of other mode of production. And maybe we are thinking that because we are thinking about capitalist economy, that it is a very material and spiritual sphere.
Yes.
We should do the same, create our cooperatives and create our new forms of production and new forms of work, maybe in general, in this immaterial sense. But maybe the answer is in very material activity to redescribe the patterns to live together in the future.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I know the literature you're drawing this from. This is the immaterial labor I'm very familiar with that literature. I think even but it's still material. Like it's still rooted in human doing, and even like in Hart Negri, affirm this. There's a misconception of what they mean by immaterial labor. It's still material. It means that the new commodity isn't as much using your hand and a hammer, but it's using cognitive, your cognitive capacities, right? It's cognitive labor, and that's harder to capture in a way completely. This is the challenge for capitalism, right? How do you capture cognitive labor? But there's more to capture. You know what I mean? For example, you can make people work longer. You can make cognitive workers work much longer, and they do this, right? It's hard to, when you're working in a cognitive field, it's hard to have an 8-hour work day. You're really working all the time. And what capital seizes from you as a laborer is your knowledge. So there's more value to be extracted. So you can there's more value to be extracted during more time, right? So there's the real subsumption of labor is much beyond. So you can eradicate that. You have to worry about the 8-hour workday anymore. The worker's working all the time. At the same time, when a worker at a high-tech firm or at a coder, when that worker leaves, everything leaves with the worker, right? It's all here, right? The tools are all here, like all the knowledge is there, so it's harder to capture. That's why they have non-disclosure agreements, and for 2 years you can't work at a competitor's firm, right? So, but all of these things, I think, that make it kind of give more value to capital also makes it very susceptible to creating cooperatives that are controlled by cognitive workers. I don't know if I'm kind of drawing a lot of things here, but I think it's a unique moment where one can expand the cooperative economy. And that cognitive workers, should they know more about cooperatives, why do they have to go work for somebody else? They can organize cooperatives or organize collectives or work on project by project basis where they're in control of the product and of their workday, and right. And so forming a cooperative gives legal structure to it. It gives legal structure, and so they can, for example, gig economy workers, when they're in between contracts, well, if they're part of a collective, they can continue to receive a salary, even though they're in between contracts. And there are many cooperatives around cognitive work that are organized in this way, particular to give security to workers, right? To bridge the contract in the gig economy. So you can take it back. You can seize a 0-hour contract economy. You can take it back. Workers can take it back for their own and I think that would make it a much more benign way of working within the system. And the problem was with the capitalist system, so we have to overthrow it. But in the meantime, it's a pretty big system, so there are ways that we can address the major issues it levels on working people by creating collectives and creating economies. Creating collectives and creating cooperatives that can kind of work within the system to erode it. I don't know if there's going to be a massive revolution that's going to overthrow the system, but I know there's going to be a continuation of crises and crises moments. This is what happened in Argentina. It was the moments of crises that bring to the consciousness of workers different ways of doing things. And we're in a crisis right now, and this pandemic crisis is a moment we see from the Argentine crisis, creation of cooperatives during that crisis, and this crisis, and how we can take back the economy in many ways that would address a lot of the difficulties that we're now experiencing.
Yes.
I see one comment from Mike and one additional question, which is super bold and radical, and I will do that. So if you have energy still, Marcelo, this is one comment from Mike is I'm quoting, exchange value is immaterial, the common substance of commodities, human energy measured by time. So that was the insight and thought. And Mike also shared the question, why not abolish work? And that's the quotation from Guy Debord. So could you just think on that a little bit?
Sorry, I didn't catch the end. Can you repeat the end? The last part was cutting out.
Why not abolish
so exchange value
work?
is immaterial for, yeah, okay. Oh, yeah. So this is the other thing, right? I brought this up very briefly in my presentation, that one critique that can be leveled against the ERTs in any kind of cooperative, worker cooperative, is that it's still centered on work. And it's still centered on a work for pay, necessarily. You're controlling your salary, your pay, but it's still work. And so shouldn't we be working towards eradicating necessary labor, necessary work, right? There are other ways that we can do it. It doesn't mean that we have to work to make, right? That we can organize it in other ways. And I totally agree. I think we have to ultimately eradicate coerced, forced work. That work has to be linked to earning a living, to them being able to put food on the table and to pay for the rent. I think there's a fundamental problem with this. I don't think we have to organize society this way. I think there's work in common that we all have to do. Some of it, we need some people to dig ditches and, make sewers and sweep floors and make houses. I mean, that work has to be done. But if you look at how traditional societies have done it, so-called traditional societies have done it, is through collective labor. So barn raisings. There's a notion in Finland called the talkut. For those of you that are Finn, you probably know, right? It's the notion that the community comes together to build a house, to fix something, to create something collectively. There's no reason why we can't reorganize ourselves in this way. And there are many communities around the world that are practicing a commoning approach to economic existence. They're doing just this. They're living in collectivities. I mean, even the notion of the nuclear family, that it's a one father and one mother that takes care of their kids and they're their own. This is a problem. It's a capitalist creation, right? More traditional societies, indigenous American, North and South American indigenous societies don't organize families this way, right? And so absolutely, I think at core here is to rethink, when we rethink the economy, when we rethink what is an alternative to a capitalist economy, the alternatives already exist. They're there for us to learn from. Zapatismo, the Aiju way of organizing economically, of the Aymara of Bolivia and Peru. These are all ways that they're already existing economic ways of organizing that don't include salaried work or a traditional kind of capitalist workplace. Again, I think we can organize these alternative forms of economic production within a cooperative. I think cooperatives could be a way of doing this and decentering work from the fundamental thing we do. I mean, there's work and there's labor, right? Work is human. We all work. I take care of my children. I'm working. My partner makes a meal. She's working. It's not remunerated, right? It's unpaid labor, right? But it's work. We're working all the time. To work is a human condition, as Hannah Arendt said. But to labor, and then to labor for money, and then to commodify labor is a capitalist practice. So what we have to do is decenter, completely eradicate labor, power, right? And recenter work. And, I mean, we can talk about this. There's going to be whole conferences around this, right? But these are very good questions. And these are fundamentally what's at stake here. But in the meantime, the system is what it is. And so we have to work within it to then, we have to, at the same time, and we can, as we say in North America, we can chew gum and walk at the same time, right? We can create better workplaces and work to eradicate waged labor, right? We can do both at the same time. These are great questions. I talk about these in my book.
That would be a great ending for the session, really. Right now, I will be thinking about rethinking not only economy, but also family and work.
Yes, there's a lot of the work of Silvia Federici, the work of Maria Rosa de la Costa, Selma James. They all tackled this issue, and Kathy Weeks and others that have looked at the eradication of work. Mm-hmm. So there's really important, and it's not coincidental that it comes from women, no. Right? Women that have had to face the consequences and uphold the capitalist system in so many ways, right? With their unpaid work, right? So anyway, so there's lots of ideas out there, and there's lots of work still to do, and I'd love to continue these conversations. So please email me. We'll have chats. We'll continue the discussion, and I'd be interested in collaborations too. So.
Thank you so much that you make this effort to come back.
Okay.
Thank you, Marcelo.
Not a problem. I feel so bad. I feel so bad that we got cut off, but I'm glad we can make it work. Thank you. Thank you. And good luck with the rest of the conference. It was an honor for me to be here. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
You will be paying for that, for making mistakes with people's names, Bartłomiej. Your name is also, how to pronounce it correctly.
I know.
Tachi, thank you so much. You gave us place. You really started a very good conversation. Thank you for Marcelo that he came back. I hope that you're satisfied with all the plots and streams of thoughts we were covering here. Thank you so much.
Have a good. Thoroughly enjoyed it.